just see if this breaks again, if I'm starting from here. All right. So this is the Messenger program, and it's based on, again, the architecture that is demonstrated on this PDF that's attached here. So I have Firefox on the left, Safari on the right. These little arrows are going to be the PHP programs that interpret our messages from the JavaScript to the SQL database, and these are the SQL tables. All right, so let's just demo the program real quick, and then we'll dig into the code. Okay, so I have two fields, a sender and a recipient. Defaults to Elliot as the sender, Gina as the recipient. I hit connect, little sound effect plays, and then a message field appears. And then I can hit this little toggle button to toggle between these, and I can type a different name in here if I want to. But I want to have these two as the, just for testing purposes right now. If you enter a new field, if a new username, it will add that user to the database. So you don't have passwords or anything. That's something you could add, but we can talk more about that later. So now if I enter a message here, I'm going to enter a message from Elliot to Gina, so from Safari to Firefox. I get a pop-up message in the window over in Firefox, and I do get my message in my sent messages over here. And this will actually stay here. Even if I hit refresh, this message will still stay here until I hit close as a new message, the way that I have it configured. So, because it's a new message. I actually don't know what happens if there's multiple of those. I think it only shows the last one. So that's kind of the operation of that. So it's pretty simple from a user standpoint. I think it's relatively self-explanatory. So anybody have any questions about that? There we go. Excellent. So I can send, for example, a message to Sarah, or it needs to be the same program. Yeah, so as long as you're using the same URL, so you have to connect to the same server, but as long as you're connecting to the same server, you can send messages back and forth. Absolutely. Yep. So it's pretty cool. Yep. Now, you could have a more sophisticated back-end infrastructure where you had multiple servers, where the servers could communicate with each other. Okay, so, but we're not going to do anything like that. But that's kind of the basis for any messaging program is kind of, I mean, all these things are just building on each other, right? So, so the things we're doing here, you just, once you kind of grasp what that is, then that you can see kind of the next logical level of building things. So don't sell yourself short. So, all right, so let's dig into how this stuff is laid, kind of set up. You can probably already see just by looking at this, because you guys have some experience in this now, that the HTML is set up on Bootstrap. So that gives me some of that alert functionality pretty easily. Gives me these buttons pretty easily. All this stuff is kind of easy then. So I'll go through that real quickly. Okay. And I might have a bug I gotta figure out, so bear with me on the bug. Not today, but I might have to give you a bug fix at some point if I figure out what that is. Or it could have just been a quirk in the database, so that it might have just worked itself out. We'll figure that out as we go. Okay, so the code I sent you is this. I zipped it up last night and uploaded it, so this is exactly what I sent you. So I have two MP3 files. I didn't put them in their own folder this time. I was lazy. I have two PHP file or four PHP files now, and we'll kind of five PHP files total. One is an installer, and I'll get into that. But then we just have our regular index, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, So a few extra files. I probably should have put some subdirectories in place, but I did not. So let's just drag this. Do I have it open already? I do. So let's get this over here. Okay. So we're going to start with the JavaScript, or we're going to start with the HTML, sorry. So same old like we had before. I'm including Font Awesome. So I have the CDN for Font Awesome, the CDN for Bootstrap, our CSS. So that stuff should be same old, same old. I have 3 columns. So I have basically everything is in this one row except for the alert. So the alert message is kind of floating by itself. So that's a separate thing. And I have a dim class that takes effect when the alert goes on. That alerts, that dims the screen behind it. And then there's 3 columns, so that's what these are. The user info column, the, 2 columns. The user info column and the message output column. The message output is 2 slots wide, so it's like 2 columns wide. And then I just have some forms. I have that exchange button to swap back and forth. That's using a Font Awesome icon, or it's a switch button. It's called switch button. I use an exchange icon. Stop me if there's anything in here that looks weird. I do have a sound sample in here. I put it near where I'm using it, which is next to the submit button. So when I hit submit, it makes a little beeping sound to signify that you're connecting. I don't have another sound for the swapping button. And then nothing fancy for the message area or the message submit or the message output. That stuff is all. There's actually nothing in the message output by default. This is stuff that gets filled in by your JavaScript. And then the alert. This is stuff that gets filled in by your JavaScript, and there is an alert that plays here. Okay. So, any questions about anything in the HTML? It's really just the 2 columns, Bootstrap. But anybody see anything that was questionable? Probably not. Okay. But not your last chance for questions, so no big deal. Jump into the CSS. Not too much here. Just a margin on some things. Display none for hidden class when we're using that. This is some on the dim. So when dim is visible, I'm setting it to black, and position absolute, fill the whole screen, opacity 50%. So it ends up being kind of gray, but it's just like dimming the screen. The alert message, just some properties on that. And then the colors on the message username and the recipient and the sender, and the text and the recipient message text, recipient message, sender message text. So this is where all the, there's color changes in here. Pretty straightforward. I didn't even use color codes in here, gray, blue, because I figured you guys would change those anyway. So I want to make those really easy to find. So I don't think the only stuff that's anything difficult in here, because most of it's just, border radius and color. And there's a box shadow to show a little drop shadow. If you could take that out if you don't want to use it, or just adjust the parameters if you do. I don't think there's anything super hard in there, but feel free to ask questions if you do. Can we make, like in WhatsApp, the 2 ticks changing their color? The 2 ticks changing their color. It's been like a million years since I've used WhatsApp. What is it? Do I have it on here? only had one friend that I used WhatsApp with, and I think I took it off. What's the two ticks changing their color? So it's like animated. Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can do whatever you want, like especially visually. If you want to have little animations or whatever, as long as you have, again, as long as you have the rights to, it changes the color of the ticks from gray to blue when they're red. Uh, yeah, I mean, um, you'd have to determine how you want to handle that, right? Um, so you'd have to have make sure they were in some fashion red. But yeah, I mean, you can absolutely do that. Hmm. So you could do it when the user clicks OK in the pop up. But like, let's say I sent 10 messages and they weren't around, they're not going to have the opportunity to click OK in all the pop ups. Um, but yeah, but you could do that. It could set that and all the older ones. Sure. So there's a few different ways to do that. Yeah. So yeah, see, so you already have good ideas on that. Good. Okay, so now let's jump into the JavaScript. Okay, a couple things. One thing that is in here that I've been putting in some of my JavaScript that I don't know that I actually mentioned before is I put this line in here, fudge true, and that ignores these lines and it gets the line numbers more correct in JSLint. So like line 14 will be line 14 instead of being like line 15 or 16 or whatever. So that's what that's about. So just heads up on that. Okay, so um, by ID as usual, show removes hidden, hide adds hidden. I have a convert timestamp function that you can pretty much just use. And what this is doing is it's converting the timestamp that we are getting from MySQL to a format that we can display. Okay, to a string that we can display. So if we go back to our screen here, if we go back to Firefox. So this format here, this is not the format that the computer stores it in the database. Okay, so you don't have to figure out that conversion. I'm doing that here. Okay. Okay. So that's that. All right. So then, is it all sort in like plain text or something? Your messages? Yes. Nothing's encrypted. Terrible security. So I want to get that out of the way right away. If you were making an actual chat app, everything about this is insecure at all levels, and I'm going to try to point that out. So for one thing, when we're utilizing this, um, you're not using the lock, right? I mean, we're not using SSL. If you were doing this as an actual program that you were having people actually use and want to be secure, unlike Zoom, everything should be totally secure all the way through as much as possible. So your stored messages should be encrypted using the user's key. It should be a long key, a secure key, maybe not even just a password, but maybe a key separate from their password, so that if they change their password, everything doesn't have to be re-encrypted, but maybe allow them to re-encrypt it. So there's some complexity there, but it's good complexity so that users are in control of their own messages. When you're dealing with messages, though, you have the complexity of, well, these two users share messages. So what do you do? Well, there are some techniques to allow them to both encrypt things so that it requires both of them, their keys, to decrypt the messages and encrypt the messages. So that's called public key encryption. So there are some methods to do that. We're not doing any of that. but those are things that exist. So I don't know if that's what your question had to deal with, but just if you show this to anybody who has any expertise in anything whatsoever, or even if they don't, this is not secure. None of this is secure. All right. So, yeah, you can't create the new Silk Road. I mean, you can, um, and you'll be sent to prison, and you'll get the virus, and you know that'll be the end of you. No more coal. All right. Your time with us was very short. All right. Went dark real fast. Okay. So, yeah, please stop me if we look like we're running out of time. I don't want to babble too much. All right. So, we have a main object here called chat. Okay. So, everything is kind of in one big object here. Okay. Didn't break it down too much. So, everything's in this function chat. So we just create a new chat. I have a couple constants here that I'm using for keys. So the return key, the escape key, we've used these before. And then I just run chat init, and then everything else is in this loop, get messages. Okay. So I'm just running get messages, and it goes and grabs the new messages from the server. Okay. So in here, so in our object properties, these are the things that we're going to the data points we're going to be dealing with. Okay, so we have the newest uh, the newest message, the newest time, the message sender, the message recipient, the message text, the time zone offset, and the messenger time. Okay, and I'll try to go through each of these as much as I can. So init just sets up the time zone offset. Okay, so what it's doing here is it's figuring out what your time zone is on your computer versus what universal time is. Okay, so that it can display the time correctly on your screen. Okay, um, so that's what this is about. The time zone offset is about showing the time correctly on your screen, because otherwise everything should be using universal time. So so then I'm just going to kind of go in order, or this isn't necessarily the order in which these are run. So logged in runs when you click the is it called connect or login? Connect. When you hit the connect button, this runs. So it plays a sound. Then it grabs the message sender and the message recipient. It sets the message output to blank. Okay, so it'll clear this to blank, just in case there was anything in there. It sets the newest message to 0. Okay, so blanks the newest message to 0 because there's no newest message. Then it shows the send message form. Okay, which is the send message form, and it sets the focus to the message. The message output. It blanks out the message output over here. Sorry, it does not blank this out because this wasn't here. So it blanks this out. It blanks out any messages that were here before, and then it puts focus in the message text over here. So it just puts the cursor here. So when I click connect here, you'll note. So here it grabbed the new message, but it puts if I hit connect again, it will. Okay, it should have not done that because I hit close here. That's interesting. I think we got a bug in there. So it's supposed to put the cursor here for focus. So I got to figure out that alert thing. I was having some problems with that, so I'm pretty sure it's related to that. I shouldn't have tried to fix it on the last day. I didn't notice there was a problem, and I think I made things worse instead of better. Get messages is that main loop, so I'm going to actually come back to that. Send messages is called when we hit the send button. Okay. So when we hit send messages, we're going to send the messages to the sendmessage.php program. We're going to grab our message text from the message text field. I should have taken that out. I had a little console log thing there. And then I'm doing some. I'm checking to make sure there is some actual message text. So a little bit of basic error checking. You could do something more sophisticated. Because we're dealing with a database, you could do something more sophisticated here too. But the biggest thing to deal with when you're dealing with like an SQL database is injection attacks. Okay, so you want to be afraid of quotation marks. And so what I'm doing here is I'm replacing quotation marks with the HTML entity equivalent of that. Okay, so all that means is this little string of code on a web page it'll render on the web page as a double quote, and this will render as a single quote or an apostrophe. Okay, so like if you put this in your HTML, it will be an apostrophe on the screen to the user, but if you look at the code, it will say and apostrophe. Okay, so there's a bunch of these HTML entities, but these are some important ones. Okay, so it's going to change these, and that's what's going to be stored in the database. Okay, so that's an important thing, just to make sure that we're not allowing some really basic hacking. Okay. How does injection happen if it's encapsulated in a string? So there's lots of injection types of things that can happen, right? So and this isn't going to be secure from everything. In fact, I would expect that there's probably some sort of injection attacks that this would be susceptible to. So there's JavaScript injection. So there's probably a way that somebody could be injecting some JavaScript into the message text by escaping out certain things that we didn't anticipate. And so then some JavaScript could render into the message text and hijack our screen and potentially like load in some ads or load in some Bitcoin mining or whatever, right? So the types of things that people try to hijack JavaScript to do. The other things are SQL injection attacks. And so what they try to do there is they'll try to read like a password database, right? So all they want to do is be able to like escape it out so that they can perform like you want to close out a string and then continue on and perform another SQL query to grab to be able to inject another query into the same query string, and I'll show what I mean by that, so that they can like do another select statement, like select all usernames and passwords from table user, and it'll try to grab them all. Okay, so so some of that stuff, it gets complicated, and because we're writing our own custom code for this, it's kind of unlikely that anybody's going to just guess how these things are laid out, but if given a little bit of time and a little bit of thinking about this, I think in a year or two you guys could hack this. So all right, so good, excellent questions though. Those are good. All right, so then we're creating the message object here. So these are the things we're going to send to the server. Okay, so the only things we actually need to send to the server from the JavaScript are the message sender. Now that's just the username. So the sender and the recipient, we're going to have a name and we're going to have a number associated with those. Okay, so in this case, it's going to be the name, and so the sender and the recipient, and these are going to be both the names involved, and then the message text. Okay, and so we did do some permutations on the message text. You could do something more sophisticated with that, like encrypt it. Okay, so you could totally encrypt that, and then you would bypass that whole issue about injection attacks that way. You'd only have to worry about like the JavaScript level injection attacks then. Okay, And then we're dealing with stringify, the JSON stringify thing again, just like we did with the address book, and that's why I wanted to touch on that in there. So we're just converting to JSON, okay? So that's really this. We're just converting that object to JSON format. And then this magic, we're going to have this HTTP request, and we're going to post it to our send message.php. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff going on here, but basically we open a connection to the connection URL using post. Post is one of the methods. You can have either post or get. Won't get too much into that. We have to give some header information just to say that it's JSON that's being sent. And then this stuff is kind of just boilerplate for what we're doing here. Okay, so you don't have to worry too much about that. If you're doing the same kind of thing, you just kind of set it up exactly the same way. There's not too many options here. Okay, and then we just send our string. So that's kind of that. The other stuff should be kind of same old, same old. Switch users, we're just grabbing those fields and swapping them. So that's easy. The key handler, I just have, I'm checking for the escape and the return key, so that, and then I'm having it do different things with those. And then, let's see. Yeah, and these are just our listeners down here. Okay, so then let's go back up to our get messages. Now this is the loop that runs every 2 seconds. You could adjust that if you wanted it to go slower or faster. If it's faster, it's going to put load on your server. So if you make it a second, it's going to double the load on your server. Okay, it's going to be checking every single second that the JavaScript is open. If you have 2 browsers open, 2 times a second, it's going to be checking. So that's how, especially like if you think about like now we have, your server is just a computer, just like the one you're sitting in front of. If you think about like right now, we're on a Google Meet thing. Ultimately, our communication right here has to go through a single point at some point. So we're communicating on a single server of some kind in some fashion, right? So, as they pack on more users, that becomes super difficult. So that's where some of these headaches happen. You have to be really smart about how you program things and deal with the bottlenecks. So, all right. So inside of my get messages, I have some functions inside of the function. Okay, so these are just some little helper functions that I broke out some of the redundant code just so it didn't get too ridiculous. So I have the build message and so again, what these are doing is just creating the actual HTML. As we get the message, if there's a new message, it creates the HTML. Okay, so build message, build data div, that's what these are doing. Okay, so don't get too bent out of shape on those things. Display alert just plays the sound and displays the alert. I don't think there's anything too fancy in there. Close alert checks for that close button and closes it. I might have to add a thing in here to update the number if I'm not doing that somewhere else. So that might be that problem where it didn't update that. I might have taken that out. So parse messages is where all the tough stuff is happening. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. So parse messages, I'm grabbing the old output, okay, and then I'm going to append things to the to the message output. Okay, so I'm grabbing the output on the right side of the screen, and then we're going to add things to it. Okay, so what I mean by that is this whole area here. If I add a new message, it's going to add a new message to the top. So it has to grab this whole thing as a string and has to add to the beginning of that string this new text. Okay. So that's kind of what we're doing there. So parse messages gets past this message object. So we're creating an array out of the message object, and so we're going through and we have data from each message object. Okay. So this is just those fields that are going to be in each of the messages now. Okay. So we have the ID, and again, that's going to be the ID from here. So we're dealing with kind of this stuff. Okay. So we're dealing with the ID right now. That's what these things are. They're all these guys. So we're checking to see if the ID is bigger than the newest message. Okay. And that's kind of how we deal with that pop-up. Like if it's bigger than the newest message, then we're going to, then we know we have to add it to our screen. And if it's newer than the newest message and it's from somebody else, well, then we pop up and say new message. Okay. If it's from us, well, we just add it to the screen because we have to add our own too. Okay. So we grab we set the newest message to data ID. And okay, so if it's bigger, then we update that. So now newest message is data ID. So that's taken care of. So this won't be true anymore. The newest time is equal to data time. So that's another one of our fields in that PDF, time. And that's going to be a Unix timestamp. So it's going to be a big long string of seconds since 1970. And then this is where we are going to build we're going to start building the actual the blue and gray message boxes. So we're going to build the message div based on the number. We're going to get the username and see if it's the sender or the recipient. And here's where we create those. Here's where we figure out the time. So we convert the timestamp and we print the timeout. And then this is where we do the display alert. Okay. So trying to watch for questions if you guys have any. Going through this relatively quickly because I want to get to the PHP too. Okay. And then if message sender and message recipient. So meaning if these both exist, then we have to do all these things. Okay. So basically we are going to we're creating the query string. Can you repeat what was the data ID? Yep. So yeah, and it gets confusing because I have to use multiple like variable. Maybe I should have called it message in here somewhere, but so the data ID is going to relate to this, okay, in the JavaScript. So data.id in this context is this. Okay, it's message ID in the database. Okay, excellent question. And data.time is this. Data.sender ID is the numeric representation of the sender. Okay, so that kind of thing. All right. Thank you for the question. I get afraid that I'm putting you guys all to sleep. All right, so then what we need to do here is we need to create a query string out of the connection URL, the sender, the recipient, and the newest message, the message ID. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to go and grab all of the messages that are new. Okay, So it creates an ID for the message. Yes. Okay. So the message ID is created by the database. The database actually creates it. Okay. And so we're trying to shove as much functionality out of JavaScript as we can. So because we want this to be as, so it's kind of like we want to make the Java of the JavaScript as simple as we can. And we want to push as much of the redundant functionality as possible into the database and into the PHP so that we don't have to deal with those things. That's kind of the idea here. We're trying to deal with an API. So we're just grabbing information. We don't care how that's implemented. And okay, the ID, yeah, that's just a number. We don't care how that gets made, but it's a number and it gets bigger. Okay. Excellent question. All right. So the way this works is we have to create a query string, and then we're going to get some results. Okay. So just like if you guys have ever noticed, when you go to do a Google search, if we search for JavaScript, up at the top, it adjusts your URL with all these parameters. Okay. So it's calling a program on the google.com server called search, and it's probably a little more sophisticated than this, but this could be a PHP program. It's likely not at Google, but it could be. And then it's passing these parameters. So one of the parameters is source, one is EL, and one is Q equals JavaScript. Okay. And OQ is probably like original query. So like if you clicked and you had multiple queries, so like it keeps track of some of these things, right? As like a history. So so these are some of the parameters that are important. Okay. So we're passing some parameters in our query. Okay. And you could use some of this in your testing. Okay. So we can try some of that stuff out. Okay. We can circle back on that. And maybe we'll try some of those things Monday. All right, so then we have the messages and the response that we're going to use. So those are just initialized variables. And then we're doing another HTTP request. This is just so we can grab those HTTP request. The XML HTTP request is just a method of grabbing information from the server without having to reload the web page. Okay. So that's what that's all about. Just like we've done on some things before. And then we're calling parse message. Okay. So we're grabbing the messages from our response from this. So this is going to give us a JSON response, and then we're going to parse it. That's it. Okay. So we're going to grab it, request it, parse it. Okay. And then done. And yeah, if there's an alert, we add this listener for the alert. Okay, so that is the JavaScript. I went through that quickly because I don't want to run out of time on us. So any questions at all on that? I know I went through it quick. And absolutely, when you guys dig into it, we can circle back on things. And like I said, there might be a bug, so I might issue an update to this, but it's 99% correct. It was working up until recently. There's still an A. What does that mean? There's still an A. That's still an A. Oh, 99%. Nice. Okay. So now the next things we're going to look at are the two programs that we're running. Okay, so we're running send message. I think that's going to be the easier of the two. So we're going to look at send message.php. Okay. So send message, and now this is a totally new thing. Okay. But I think you're going to start to see patterns emerge in programming. Okay. There are differences, but you're going to see patterns emerge. Just like if you know Spanish and English, or French and English, or French and Spanish, you see some patterns emerge. There's punctuation similarities. There are some words that are in common. So computer languages are even more similar. They're more similar than different in most cases. So the first thing you'll notice is that send message.php instead of .js. Okay, that's a given. So what the .php does is it tells your web server that this is a PHP file, and then your web server interprets this. So this PHP code is run on your server. It is not run by your browser. Your browser doesn't know anything about PHP. Your browser only knows JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. That's all it knows how to read. Okay? So this PHP stuff, if it gets some of this, it's going to be like, I don't know, this is some text. I can read text, but I don't know what to do with it. Okay? So, so the very first thing is, because PHP is a server-side language, it's it was originally built to just add little features to make web pages more dynamic. So if I would go grab a page from, let's go back to that Google example. If I go grab a page from Google, I would have this standard template. I'd have my search box, my logo, but then I'd have these results, and I'd need to fill in these results. But this stuff would all be standard. Okay, so I would just print the stuff up, the Google logo and the form. I would fill that out. I would just have regular HTML there, and then I would just have then I would leave this. I would put PHP code here. Okay, and so that's how PHP was originally built, to be embedded into a web page, kind of like JavaScript can be embedded into a web page. Okay, it was really initially built that way. But as programs have become more complex, generally speaking, PHP programs kind of stand on their own, just like JavaScript stands on its own. So a holdover from that, though, is that we always start our PHP programs with sort of this pseudo HTML tag. Okay, so this bracket question mark PHP. Okay, and then we always close them with a question mark bracket. So PHP programs always start that way. Okay, so that's just one little idiosyncrasy. You could probably configure your web server to just ignore that sort of thing, but that's the default. Okay, then we're require once. I have another PHP file that I'm including in. I'm including some other code that gets pulled in to be reused in each of these programs, because there's common code that gets reused here. So in both Messenger, in the send message and get messages, I have to connect to the SQL server. So there's some redundant code there. So I'm reusing that. Okay. So I'm requiring messenger.php in those. Okay. And we'll circle back on that. And I have debug mode turned on. So what that does is it allows you on the server to see some debug messages, and I will show you how you can access those. It's not super easy, but you can get access to those. All right, so then the way we are getting the data in is just this line right here. Okay, so the data that we get sent from the that query, so we're getting sent a message, the one we just looked at. So we're getting sent a message is right here. Okay, so we just have this funny looking PHP input thing. So that's just saying, like, grab the stuff, the post data that we got sent. Okay, so we're getting the file get contents, and the thing about PHP you'll notice is there's a function for everything in PHP. So this is a built-in function. I didn't make this. This is a built-in PHP function, and they have long, crazy names, and it's very inconsistent what the parameters are. A lot of people hate PHP for that reason, but there's a function for everything. So there's you don't have to write much code in most cases, because there's like a built-in way to do almost everything. So there's pros and cons. And then one other thing to notice is we have a variable here that we're setting it raw message data. This is my variable, but I have a $sign in front of it. In PHP, variables have $signs. Okay, no big deal. They have $signs. So functions do not, but variables do. Variables have $signs. So just one thing to keep in mind there. Then I'm calling debug it. This is just so I can have some debug code. So this is my function that I wrote. So debug raw message data, and I print it out to the console log on the server. Okay. So that's what I was looking at when I was trying to figure out what was going wrong before, but I'll do that later. Okay. So all these debug it's you can kind of ignore. The error logs you can ignore because that's all the same stuff. So message data, JSON decode. This is very similar to how it works in JavaScript. We're just decoding the JSON data and we're putting it into message data. So we're just creating an object there. Okay. And message sender is equal to message data, and then we're using the arrow operator. So some languages use the dot, and some use the arrow. Some, like C++, will use both in different circumstances, but this just means message data is the object, and this is a property on that object. Okay, so this is a variable inside of message data. Okay, and then we're passing this as a parameter to scrub it. And scrub it is a little function I wrote to just, again, kind of just keep from having some of those obvious injection attack things or things that can cause some issues in the when you send it to a database. Okay. So I'm doing that for the recipient too. So I'm just reading these in, and if I didn't have this scrub it thing, I would just basically be saying message recipient equals message data recipient. Okay. So message text, same thing. Okay. And then here is where the rubber meets the road. We're finally getting into our final language of the day, and that is SQL. So MySQL is its own language, and we are writing SQL in our PHP, which is crazy, right? So what we're doing is we're writing a program right here in sender SQL. Okay, so we're writing a little one-line program here. And so it ends with a semicolon. We're writing a select statement. Okay, and so I'm writing select ID from users where username equals, and then in quotes, message sender limit 1. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I have the username and I want to get the number, because in the SQL database, everything is using the number. So I have to get the number so that I can actually put a message into the database. Okay, that's all this is. So I have to get the number. Okay, and I have to get the number of the recipient. Okay, so that's it. And so then I have finally the very last thing here is insert into messages. So you'll see this program is only 35 lines with debug code. So there's not much here. Okay. So then I have insert into messages, and then in parentheses. So you could think about this as like insert is like a function call, right? So I'm saying insert into messages, parentheses, and then these are the parameters: sender ID, recipient ID, text. Okay. So, and I'm going to bring these back here. So messages, here's the message. I want to write in sender ID, recipient ID, and text. I called it message here. It's supposed to be text. I should update that. Because I didn't want to call this message in this message. I changed that to text at some point. Sorry about that. So then I have the, so I'm inputting into this the values of the variables: sender ID, the number, recipient ID, and the actual text. Okay, and then we actually have to perform that query, and there's a PHP function call to actually do that. So messages there, what is that? Messages, this, insert into messages, is this the one you're talking about? So messages is the actual table. Does that help? So that's this table. Okay. Oh, and I messages here and message here. So I made some changes. So where have you created it in code? Where did I create this table? In code? I actually did, but it doesn't have to be. Okay. So this actually is running in an SQL database. So this just runs. So we're setting up the database. So if you think about the database as being like a spreadsheet, like Microsoft Excel, once we set it up, it just is there, and we can issue commands and add data to an existing spreadsheet. Okay. So, but I am using that. I do have code to actually create that, so that you can, and I did that so that you can just wipe out the database and start over. So I do have that as code now. Okay, so that's in the installer.php. That's the part that I worked on yesterday, and I think I messed a couple things up when I did that. So that's where that 1% bug came from, as I was working on that. Okay, so awesome question. Okay, so what do you have to do for this program? Are you going to give us the database? Yes, I am going to give you the database. Actually, I gave you the database. And you're going to set it up by running installer.php. So what I want to do here, what are you going to do? What do you have to do for this program? You have to customize it and add a feature. Okay. We can talk more about what some possible features are Wednesday, but basically, if you can look me into the virtual eye and say, I think that's a cool feature, it's probably a cool feature. Okay. If you have trouble coming up with ideas, I have things that people have done in the past, but I'd rather you try to come up with creative ideas. All right, so then I want to just touch base with what messenger.php is. So we're including that code. So what PHP does is it copies and pastes that code right into this code. Okay, so it'll copy that in and paste it right in here. So messenger.php is over here. Okay, and that also has a require once. Okay, so it has another 30 lines of code that are copy pasted in here, but there's not much to this. Okay, so it just has a function debug it that just does some tests, and if the tests are fine, put it in the error log. Okay, so that's no big deal. We create the connection, and if the connection is no good, then fail. And then scrub it. Oh, look, I don't have any additional validation code in here. Don't trust users. So this is something you could add as your feature. You could scrub the data, or I might give you some potential like validation stuff in there. Okay, but that's a way that you can validate your code or validate the input. Okay, so there's that. Somebody put a new message. You gave it the database. When and where? All right, I'm getting to that. Credentials. All right. So this includes credentials, and the credentials are stored here. So this is the information necessary to connect to the MySQL database. The host is localhost. The MySQL server could be on a different physical server, on a different IP address, but it's on your local server. So we use localhost for that. The username we're using is message user. The password is this. You could change these things, but I'll show you where you have to change it if you want to change it. And the database name is Messenger. So you could change these three things, but if you change them here, you'll also have to change them in installer. This is where the SQL database gets set up. So in installer, this you cannot change because this is the default password. So I have localhost root, and this is the root password for your database. Okay, so this is full administrator access to your MySQL. Okay, yeah, you don't have to change it. So I'm including the credentials in here. So if you change those credentials, you'll need to rerun this program. Okay, and so basically I run this install task, and I go through each of these install tasks. Again, I'm just creating this SQL, and I'm running it, and I document it as I go. Okay, so I'm dropping the user if it exists. I'm creating the user. I'm dropping the database messenger if it exists, and then I'm creating it. I'm granting privileges on messenger to our user that we have to create is on JavaScript or has to be PHP. It can be either. It just needs to be something that like I'll see when I look at it, right? So, um, I'll need to if it's PHP, I'm not gonna be able to see your PHP code. So you'll need to like put a note that if you're doing PHP to scrub data, you'll need to put a note there that you're scrubbing data, and make sure that I know that. And then here is there any reason we're using PHP? Because using JavaScript on the server is a little more complex. A lot of people do use JavaScript on the server using Node.js now, because then they only have to know one language, and you could do all these same things with Node.js. Okay, but we're using JavaScript for this. I PHP is still one of the top five most popular languages. Like, so when PHP is diminishing in popularity and C++ is diminishing in popularity, it's like, well, yeah, but like when you're one of the most popular, yeah, yeah. I mean, Facebook is all run on PHP, so and lots of important things are. It's just not cool to like PHP. But it's important to be exposed to it so you can know why you hate it. It's not an elegant language, yeah. But it's actually gotten a lot better. So like PHP 7, the newest version, they've cleaned up a lot of the problems that in the past. There were a lot of security problems in the past. So anyway, this is where we're creating the table. Okay, so this is where we're describing the, if you think about a table as being like an object declaration, we're creating a type. So this is a field, the ID. This is the time. So the ID field, it can't be null. It can be an integer up to 255 bytes in length, which is a long integer. It auto increments, and it's our primary key. Okay, and that's for database optimization reasons that we do that. Okay, time. The default is going to be the current timestamp, but this is going to be a timestamp field. Okay, and then on update. So if we update a message for some reason, which you could do as a feature, you could allow editing of old messages. Then the update would be the current timestamp. Okay, so that would be something you'd have to do PHP and JavaScript with, but that would be an interesting feature, something Twitter still hasn't done. So it's not easy to do, right? And then sender ID, that's an integer, so that's a number, not a name, right? So these link the databases to the database tables together, the sender ID and the recipient ID. Image URL is a string. It's it's just some a URL probably, and then this is the actual text. So I called the text instead of messages. At some point I changed that and didn't update my PDF. Okay, and then I just run that install SQL, and the users is even simpler. It's just an ID, and the ID is the same. It gets basically built the exact same way. Auto increments. The username is it can be up to 16 characters long, so there is a limit there, and I'm not relaying that to the user. Probably should do that. Display name can be up to 255 characters. No good reason for that. I'm not communicating that to the user either, and I'm not using that either, by the way. And again, image URL, same thing. That's probably a URL. It's 255 characters. Not sure if that's a good limit or not, but that's just what I did. So that's all there is to that. Okay, and then this is something that when you upload, you can run this. So if I am on this, I can type installer.php, and then it runs all these things and it tells me if each step was successful. Okay, so drop database user successful, create DB successful, So it did all those things, boom, real quick, right? Because they're all happening on the server. And now when I go back to the messenger and I hit connect, there won't be any messages because I wiped out the whole database. Okay, so that's helpful when you're debugging. Okay, and the other thing we can look at is you do have PHP My Admin on here, and except it's not in Messenger, it's out here. And I think we're just about out of time. So, and that's that root password, that confrontation-2016 that I put in there. And if we look here, we have Messenger on the side here. If I click on Messenger, I'll see our two tables, messages and users. I can click on messages. Now, if I had messages in here, they would all be listed here. But if I want to look at the structure of it, I can click on structure, and it lists out how I have things set up. So there's another visual way you can do things, and I can actually edit this stuff in here in a visual way. Okay, so so you don't have to write it in code by hand, but you can. So there is all that stuff, and I think we are done. I assume you will have other questions. If I created my own JavaScript, CSS, HTML, can I sell it for cash online? I assume no. I assume so. Yeah, why wouldn't you be able to? I don't know what you mean. Like, can you use this and sell it for cash? I don't care. Yeah. Yeah. If you make money, make money. Do it. Do it. Make money. I mean, if you make something cool, yeah, you'd be all good. Like that would nothing make me happier than to see you guys do something really cool with this. But keep in mind, there's no security, so hire a lawyer too. So I'm gonna hit the stop button on our recording. I will get this uploaded as soon as I can. Any last minute questions before I hit stop? I think we're just about out of time though, right? Nothing. I'm gonna hit stop then.